talk about moving from a teaching platform to a learning platform. Would you explain that?
Yeah, but I want to qualify before I explain it. When I first started talking about teaching platforms and learning platforms, I didn't understand as much as I now understand. I wish I'd used the word instructional platform rather than teaching platform, because the word teaching is really quite often used as a synonym for instruction. People graduate from departments with curriculum and instruction. And so we understand that instruction has been the dominant definer of the role of teacher. But we've always known that teachers do things other than instruct. They coach, they diagnose, they do all those sort of, but those are kind of put at the bottom of the hierarchy. When you say, how is the role of teacher defined? It's normally mainly defined by the instructional function. And really what I'm talking about is changing the school from an instructional platform to a learning platform. And it's that instructional aspect of the role of teacher that I think, and the schools have been designed to support that. And what do I mean? It's the dissemination of information, the giving of direction and so forth and so on, that largely is the school's a platform for that. If you take a look at the way a classroom is set up, it's almost set up like a mini stage in many instances. There is clearly a front in the room. And the front of the room is wherever the teacher is. The teacher is the center of the action. And the instruction comes from the teacher. If you're talking about a learning platform, the action is controlled by the student rather than controlled by the teacher. The instructor is the center of the action in the learning teaching platform. The student is the center of the action in a learning platform. And the student has control of the activity as opposed to the teacher having control. As much as anything else, it's an issue of who controls the activity. Does the student control the activity? The schools are designed in such a way the kids get access, they pull information out, as opposed to they have to wait for the teacher to give it to them. If I can get access to information without the teacher, then you've got more of a learning platform. When the teacher is the arbiter of when I get the information, they pass out the papers, they give the assignments, they decide the order of work. Then you've got an instructional platform. But when you essentially say that you got a problem and the kids decide to get this and then they get that, and there isn't a right order. And that's one of the things, by the way, that happens a lot of times when teachers get into this. We've been taught we're supposed to decide the process, and so the process itself doesn't discipline the activity. The teacher disciplines the activity. And so the kid doesn't discover the discipline of problem solving. They look at the teacher and say, am I doing it right? But what that does is it doesn't give the kid the discipline, because the kid doesn't control the discipline. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but the real issue of how do you organize a classroom, how do you organize a school, so that the emphasis is around what the students do, rather than the emphasis being around what the teacher does.
So when you say, though, that the student controls the activity, what does that actually mean? I mean, does that mean, where does the teacher come into play with that?
Well, if the teacher is organizing the work raises questions. I mean, if I'm doing a piece of work and I want to know what should I do first, what should I do second, and then the work is laid out there. Now you watch a kid playing with Legos, and Daniel gets these Lego kits, and the Lego kits are relatively loosey-goosey about what step 1 and step 2 and step 3 is. You see the whole picture, and you can start here, you can start there, and the student has control. The student or the designer has control. Eventually they wind up with a known product, but I may start here. Now once I start here, I can find, hey, that was a false start, because when I get there, all at once I got a piece underneath I got to put in. Now I got to take all those pieces out and go back. There must be a better way to solve this problem. Well, the student has control of the staging and the steps and so forth and so on. And part of the learning is how to do the work. So, in a learning platform, and that's what we're trying to get, is for kids to learn how to learn, as well as learn what they learn.
So that has some very definite implications then for the teacher in that shift. So there are some assumptions that underlie each of those platforms.
Mm-hmm.
So Give me 2 or 3 assumptions for each.
Well, I think the teaching platform starts out with the assumption there is probably one best way to do something. And the teacher ought to be a master of that best way and will instruct kids in doing it that best way. The learning platform starts out with there are alternatives. And some of them are more efficient than others, some of them are more lovely than others. Some of them expose you to things you might, and it may not be the best in terms of efficiency. It's kind of like driving down a highway. You know, I can pick out, what's the best way to get from here to Lexington? We're in Louisville, Kentucky. Well, I can tell you the best way to get there. The best way is to get on the interstate, and you get there in about an hour, and it's all straight, and you won't see much. Or I can tell you a better way to go if you really want to see something. You want to see the horse farms and so forth. We'll go through Paris and go a different way. It won't get you there as fast, but you'll see a lot more scenery. And so the same thing is true in terms of inquiry. That I can go the best way, that is the most efficient way, or I can go a way of exploration. And I wind up seeing a whole bunch of stuff and maybe accidentally bumping into something I didn't even know existed. And so the real question, how much faith do you have in a broadening education as opposed to a narrowing education?
So one assumption was one way to do it versus alternate ways.
Right.
And what's another assumption?
When the control of the learning process is in the hands of the learner, you get more profound learning than the control of the learning process is in the hands of others. So when the teacher controls the learning process, or imposes the learning process, as opposed to allowing your kid to discover the learning process or create their own learning process, the teacher in control is still an efficiency thing, but not necessarily an effectiveness thing. It may not be the most efficient way to instruct. It may not be the most effective way for kids to learn.
As a teacher, if I'm thinking of this shift and I really want to approach my work from this whole idea of a learning platform, what's some advice you would give me? What would you ask me to think about, or what I need to keep in my head?
Learning to do what you're doing right now. Really work on questions and make them honest questions for yourself. And ask yourself, what are the questions I ought to be encouraging these kids to ask? Not what answers should I? See, in a teaching platform, you worry about what answers you want the kids to give. In a learning platform, you worry about what questions you want to encourage them to ask. How do I get them to ask the right questions? Because if they ask the right questions, then they're going to start pursuing the right information. So the real trick of a teacher trying to create a learning platform is helping kids frame questions that are their questions that lead to the kind of learning you want them to engage in. And so learning how to think through the kind of questions one would have to be able to answer in order to do what you want them to do, and then how's the information you want them to learn related to that. That's a very different thing than here's the topic I want to address. What questions does that topic address? What questions are there?
When you think of each of those platforms, the instructional platform and the learning platform, what opportunities and or risks are associated with each?
No, the learning platform is full of great opportunities for students. Students now have opportunities to explore things they might, if they were in an instructional setting, they would be limited. Because the student is limited to whatever it is the instructor decides to set before them. That's one of the things that's happened to education generally. That there was a time when, let's just take historical information. There was a time about the only place you could get historical information was from a library or a textbook or a teacher. Now you can get it from television, you can get it from, now sometimes it's wrong. Sometimes it's inaccurate, but so are textbooks. Error is possible in any of them, but when you have an instructional platform, you are limited to the information that the instructor makes available. When you're a learning platform, you're free to explore in a whole wide range of arenas that are increasingly becoming available with new technology and but we don't have to wait. So so those advantages are students. Now let me tell you the disadvantages or the threats First off, it threatens teacher control. Because if you can control the knowledge that people can gain access to, then you can control the people. But if knowledge is the basis of your control, the authority of the teacher is fundamentally threatened. In fact, I would argue that the knowledge revolution that has occurred in the last 50 years has really challenged more the teachers who see their primary role of that as instructor. Let me give you an example. When I started teaching school, probably 6 to 8% of the adults in the community where I taught had college degrees. Almost all the teachers had college degrees. That gave us an advantage. The teachers had superiority of knowledge, at least verified knowledge. Today, if you went back to that same community, probably 40% of the adults would have college degrees, and they're the parents. Almost the parents have parity in knowledge with the teachers. That threatens the status of the teacher. If my status is based upon my having more knowledge than you have, and all once people get the same degree, that changes the whole relationship. The same thing is true in terms of access to knowledge. It used to be that the teacher probably had more the newest knowledge available in the community in science, let's say. But now kids can come across a new discovery when they're messing around with their computer and come and report it to the teacher. Is that so? Where'd you find it? Where'd you hear that? And almost we're learning new things from a student. That threatens our authority if we are stuck on it. We've got to be the expert. If we are our expertise is in inquiry and in learning, as opposed to what we know, and our expertise is helping that kid figure out whether what he learned is in fact so, because there's all kind of knowledge claims made. But the question, what's the basis of the claim of that knowledge? If you watch the debates, part of the problem we've got is knowledge claims. And now what happens is a candidate says something, and 6 months later wants to deny he said it. Well, you could do that if you didn't have a video. But now we got videos, and all at once, I've got to be honest and say, hey, maybe I did say that, because it sure looks like it on television, doesn't it? Well, I didn't mean what I said, or I've changed my mind. Authors have always been stuck with that, particularly authors of scholarly work. Because what happens is you write something, that's the best you know at the time. A year later, you change your mind because you learned some new stuff. But that's not the same thing as changing your position, changing your values,